Welcome, listeners, to this special edition of the OIC Podcast. Following up with the Open-Mindedness podcast, today's podcast is on skepticism. Now, why does skepticism have to do with open-mindedness? We briefly touched on this in the last podcast. In order to have an open mind, you have to be willing to consider other options that contradict your current worldviews. Now, though you may be stable in your faith, in your belief and trust in these certain worldviews, there's always a healthy level of skepticism that, when injected into these worldviews that we hold, then it can allow us to either realize that we're being deceived or become stronger in our awareness of why these worldviews are truth. And therefore, we have a greater understanding of what we believe. And I think that's always a healthy thing, right, Kevin? You know, knowing what you believe is important.
Well, absolutely. Because if you don't have proof of what you know, then that's what breeds skepticism.
Right. And it breeds skepticism against your beliefs. And it doesn't allow you to have a air of intelligence or an air of confidence in sharing these worldviews.
Absolutely.
Now, especially for followers of Jesus, this is important.
Very important.
To be able to consider both sides of such a big worldview as that. That is why so many Christians out there, so many followers of Jesus, I like to say, are very aware of the arguments in atheism, arguments in other worldviews, religions, yes. So having that, knowing that, you can understand that it's not always a bad thing to consider opposing worldviews.
Right.
And so skepticism is always important. No matter who you are, where you are, what you do, skepticism can benefit you in some way, shape, or form.
So, with that said, who is a skeptical person? A person who questions the validity and authenticity of something that is purporting to the factual. A person who maintains a doubting attitude as toward values, plans, statements, or character of others. A person who doubts the truth of a religion, especially Christianity, or of important elements of it.
Right. Thanks for highlighting that, Kevin. Now, when we are a skeptic, that doesn't always mean, it is in many cases, but it doesn't always mean that you're opposing other worldviews strongly. It doesn't mean that you're seeking out to discredit certain worldviews. I believe the only authentic reason that we can have for opposing worldviews and strongly trying to disprove them is if we believe there's a certain danger in that worldview and we're trying to help those people, who are stuck in that worldview.
Yep.
There is another reason that people are skeptic, though, and a lot of times it has to do with personal viewpoints, personal emotional reactions to certain things in life. Maybe you had a bad experience with one certain worldview or one certain idea, and now your entire skeptic journey is centered on disproving that idea. And oftentimes, when it's emotionally charged, it can really lead to some unintelligent ways of being skeptic.
Yeah, and Noah, since you've had a lot of experience in this arena, give them an example for them to be able to kind of wrap their mind around.
Right. Well, the most obvious example in my life is when I was in what's called the quote-unquote New Age movement. And me being in this New Age movement, it's kind of a worldview where it's your truth is your truth, and that's good. No matter what your worldview is, and as long as it is in the name of love or benefiting humanity or something along the lines of, self-empowerment, and also, an openness to spirituality and spiritual ideas, then how could that possibly be bad? Well, when I became a follower of Jesus, I realized that there's a lot of deception in the world. Being deceived means you're out of touch with reality. And being out of touch with reality is never a good thing.
Well, but if you take it one step farther, you have a misalignment with reality.
Correct.
Misalignment with truth. And then if you want to make it intimate and personal, misalignment with God within both of those.
Correct. Now, being in alignment with God is so life-changing, and we've covered that in multiple podcasts. So I will put a few of those podcasts where we talk about just the power of this harmony with God, and one of them that comes straight to my mind is the Most Powerful Belief podcast. We did that one quite some time ago. So in my life, though, I became a skeptic to Christianity because of deeply charged emotional reasons, and these emotional reasons were largely due to arguments along the lines of, well, there's a lot of hypocrisy in Christianity. There's a lot of negative things that happen in Christianity, and also the worldview that many atheists have, including one very famous agnostic. I actually have a audiobook that I just downloaded by this man, and his name is Bertrand Russell. His worldview was that Christianity is something that keeps people in a state of submission, because he didn't think the Bible was real. He considered it almost a step above a folktale or a fairy tale.
Yes.
So that worldview is completely false, by the way. The Bible's historically accurate. It's by far the New Testament, at least, is by far the most accurate historical account we have, just because of all the manuscript evidence and historical evidence that backs it up. So my worldview in Christianity when I was in this New Age movement was that this is just one of many other religions that keep people kind of in a tunnel vision viewpoint of what the world really has to offer.
Right.
When I became a authentic skeptic to Christianity, I actually read the Bible for the first time all the way through. I actually considered information surrounding the Bible and surrounding Jesus Christ specifically. I was actually slightly disappointed to find out that, wow, there's a lot to back this up.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it disappointed me was because I'd spent all this time having this set worldview on what the Bible was, and it was honestly very judgmental.
Yeah.
I didn't really realize it at the time. I thought I was, working for their benefit by, if I did talk about it, by talking about it in a negative way. But what I realized was I'd spent all this time not really looking into it, not being an authentic skeptic, but instead making very generalized assumptions about not only the Bible, but Jesus Christ. And a lot of them didn't even make sense. And I came to realize that when I had accepted Jesus Christ, and one of these specifically is that you'll hear this a lot if you listen to authentic followers of Jesus. Jesus would have been one of only 3 things if what he said in the Bible is an authentic and accurate account, and I believe it is.
Right.
First-person testimony. So he would either be a lunatic, a liar, or he would be who he says he is, God in human flesh.
Right.
And the reason for this being is because there's no one out there that declares himself to be God as Jesus did and isn't one of those 3 things.
Right. And so skepticism, simply put, is doubt. This disbelief can be based on a lack of science and science evidence to support a claim. And it can be based on religious beliefs. Sometimes people are skeptical just because they don't believe something in spite of scientific evidence. The reason why I'm going over this is because, as you know, listeners, is that we always do a 3-part of our podcast: the ancestral, the biblical, and then scientifically accurate insights and information presented in a new way. Now, the rest of the story. Please continue, Noah.
Well, we should jump into ancestral, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Because ancestrally, if there weren't skeptics, then we may have gone off track into some certain worldview that was inauthentic. Without skeptics, we can't have opposing worldviews, and it becomes a sort of totalitarianism where, this is what it is, and you have to believe it.
Yeah. Being skeptical is not a bad thing, and a healthy dose of professional skepticism is essential in fighting fraud, even if it seems unnatural or uncomfortable to the skeptical person who is having that income or that outcome of trust. We give people the benefit of the doubt instead of resetting the level of skepticism.
instead of resetting the level of skepticism.
Yeah, because the whole thing with it is that we give people the benefit of the doubt, but then we don't raise the bar. We don't go to the next level or standard. We allow them to be able to repeat the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So part of our training series is to be able to teach, train, motivate, direct, and guide people to a higher level of truth and understanding, not only in their abilities, but in their capabilities of being able to help other people while helping themselves.
Correct. Now, I have a post that I had written on inanewway.com. It's called Woke in a New Way.
Mm-hmm.
And on that post, I highlight how I carry out research and how that's changed in my life. And so awareness is better than wokeness.
Yes.
Because awareness means that you are aware of the information on both sides, being a skeptic,
Yep.
and that you've come to the conclusions that you have based on the evidence that you've allowed yourself to be presented with.
Because you are aware in the environment in the now of that information.
That's right. So they say knowledge is power. It's true. Knowledge is the power and the ability that you have to authentically come to conclusions in what you believe.
So, ancestrally wise, if it wasn't for our ancestors being able to enable skepticism to come about,
Right.
we all would be trained puppets. We would all be robots. We would all be thinking one thought, one suggestion at a time based on someone else's beliefs, based on someone else's fundamentals, and that would be just simply wrong.
Right.
So our ancestors helped to be able to bridge the gap between authentic truth and authentic lie. And then the in-between part is the skepticism, because healthy skepticism allows you to be able to stay open-minded while researching to get to a positive conclusion.
That's right.
So there is some healthiness to skepticism, but you have to be able to know its driving force and factor, right?
Right. And if haughtiness is the driving force of skepticism, then that's not healthy.
Correct.
And why is that? Well, there's a lot of instances, at least in my life, where someone will say something or I'll look something up and I'll see an opposing worldview and it has information about something that opposes what I already believe. And if I were haughty, I would say, "Oh, I'm writing that off. That's not true." Well, having a healthy level of skepticism means I see that information and then I go and research it more to get to the bottom of what the authentic truth is in that case scenario.
So we thank our ancestors for being able to get us this far. Now we have to be able to literally learn the lessons from our ancestors as far as what they did right and what they did wrong, to be able to then continue to be able to move forward, to be able to pass on the healthy part of the skepticism that allows us to be able to thrive and survive, right?
That's right.
Now, if you're wanting to get over or to be able to be less skeptical, there are 8 helpful tips of getting rid of your skepticism.
Okay.
One is to pinpoint your insecurities. If you don't know where your insecurities come from, how can you fight it? How can you remove it? How can you get over something that you don't know what is causing it?
Right. And it becomes a sort of really negative loop where you're going through these experiences and you're just letting them happen. But as soon as they happen, so more of a woe is me type of mindset instead of a how do I bridge this, how do I heal this wound? How do I get over this issue in my life? What am I doing wrong? What can I be doing instead?
You go from a woe is me to then how can we, right?
That's right. How can we with God?
Negative to a positive, right?
That's right.
Second one is find a hobby or a lot more time for a hobby than you already have in place. It's important to be able to have some kind of a hobby, something that you enjoy authentically doing that really makes you feel you. And I don't care what it is, but you got to proclaim it. You got to be able to say, hey, I like, and of course, these are just examples, stamp collecting, coin collecting. I like to go treasure hunting. I like, and you can name off almost anything, right? But proclaim it. Call it your own. Call it something that you thoroughly, as a hobby, want to do.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Do you have any hobbies that you like to do, Kevin?
Well, my hobby is literally metal detecting, for one. That's always fascinating because not only do I find junk, but I always then remove the junk from the earth, which is great.
Right.
But then there's sometimes that I get authentic treasures, which could be rings, it could be coins, it could be almost anything like that, that allow me to take a step back in time to evaluate and appreciate what was left behind by someone else during some timeline. And then it gets my brain wondering, when did that person walk through my grass? When did that person, walk in my yard? When, did he pitch a tent? Did he,
Right.
what happened and why did he lose this coin? And was it like not important to him, or was he careless or reckless, or was he running from bandits, or what was it bandits that were running away with the coin? You never know, but you can always put picture images in your mind of things of what ifs, right?
That's right.
And that's the exciting thing, is that when you're sweeping across and you're hearing ding, 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 ding.
That's a great rendition.
But not only do you feel like a winner, like you really captured or found something, but you are literally pinpointing the source of where it's at. Then you allow yourself to be able to gently dig into the soil to be able to use that effort that our ancestors did to be able to then uncover whatever, whether it's junk or it's a treasure. But either way, you're removing from the earth something that the earth wanted you to have removed in the first place. Otherwise, in a destiny situation, you wouldn't have had that metal detector. You wouldn't have that desire. You wouldn't have had that interest to be able to literally hone in on that in the first place.
Wow, you just got very deep.
Oh, of course I did. And that's only surface deep.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, the third helpful tip for getting rid of your skepticism. What you got?
Identify your accomplishments. Now, you don't have to have a Nobel Peace Prize and an Oscar to consider yourself successful. Try to find a hidden or the small successes in life. For example, if you read a thick book or clean the house instead of watching television, you can say that you were trying to improve yourself and your environment. Not to mention, it illustrates that you have a great discipline. Ultimately, confidence is all about your outlook on life. Number 4 is help other people. Being altruistic has been shown to be a cure for self-doubt by many scientific studies. Whether you're helping a friend move or donating some money to a homeless person you come across, you are making a difference in someone's life. Thus, your action has made you a matter to the other person, a feeling which brings with it a certain level of fulfillment.
Yes, and a little bit to do with those last two healthy tips is something that we talked about in the Can Do Spirit podcast, where we talked about how mini celebrations are so important.
Yes.
If you don't have these mini celebrations, then your motivation decreases. So have those mini celebrations.
Absolutely.
Pat yourself on the back.
Number 5, face your fears. Try doing what you are most afraid of. You'll find out it wasn't as bad as you thought. By doing something you never thought you would, you will make all of your other insecurities seem relatively insignificant.
Right, little disclaimer there. Don't be doing crazy things just because Kevin and Noah said you could.
Right.
Keep it reasonable.
Yes. Number 6, take a different view on failure. Here's a very powerful one. Don't treat mistakes as a reflection of your incompetence, but as an opportunity to improve yourself. If you find this difficult, you can use the internet as a source of inspiration. You can always Google a story about a college dropout becoming a billionaire. Clearly, there are some ways to bounce back from any level of failure. Number 7, talk to someone. This is where we have really been vital, relevant, and pertinent in people's lives. Unload your fears and insecurities and get an objective opinion. When you build something up in your head, you often perceive a scenario to be worse than it is. So when people call us, since we are Master Certified Life Coaches, is that we can be able to break down the barriers, break down the fears, break down the insecurities that one has to be able to rationalize and to be able to internalize and be able to see what it actually truly is in clarity for you to then to be able to abolish, to be able to rebuke, and to be able to move forward from.
Indeed. A lot of fear is based on the unknown, and when you make the unknown known, then it loses its fear factor a lot of times.
Number 8, be thankful for what you have. You are an accomplished person in one way or another, and there are plenty of positive qualities in you. So with that said, this quote is for you. Believe in yourself. Now, take the first 2 letters in believe, and what does it say?
Be.
And then take the first 3 letters of the last word in yourself, and that would be you, right? God created you to be who you are because he created you to be that way. So if you're struggling, if you have insecurities, if you have doubts, if you have worries, if you have fears, understand that someone else taught you those things. God doesn't teach that to his creation. You have to literally adopt these negative things in order for it to become your reality. So now knowing this, we all need to be parental adopters and adopt new vocabulary, new way of thinking, new way of feeling, and a new way of being whole and complete, but in a new way. And again, through our training series that we have, in a new way training series, we can step you through gently, slowly, confidently, and securely into the steps that you need to be able to take to be able to make your life whole and complete in the manner that you see fit, not us. So Noah, now, more about either the biblical or scientific.
I want to move on to biblical skepticism.
Yay!
The Bible has a lot of skepticism in it.
Well, yes, and why?
Well, I believe that the Bible, being the inerrant word of God, has skepticism in there to show believers that, hey, this can be a good thing, but also show that there's a certain amount of faith, there's a certain amount of trust that we have to have in God in order and not be a haughty skeptic in order for God to actually, manifest himself in our lives, us being open to that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it has skepticism on both sides, the haughty skeptic and the
Not so
reasonable.
haughty.
Yeah, the reasonable skeptic. And now the disciples were skeptics. It has accounts in the Bible of these disciples of Jesus Christ themselves being skeptical of Jesus Christ.
Because if they wouldn't, they would have never asked a single question.
That's right. They would have been just cult followers, So, and it happens all too often in this world, unfortunately. But it's important to realize that these disciples were not cult followers. They were actually skeptical. Mm-hmm. Now, the most important event in Israel's history, the Messiah coming, is not something to take lightly.
Right.
And so they didn't take it lightly. There were actually, many of you may not know this, I believe I said this in another podcast, but there were many, there were many false messiahs in the time of Jesus. And they were all brought down by skeptics. And Jesus himself, oddly enough, was brought down by skeptics, but his movement, his life, both pre-death and post-resurrection,
mm-hmm.
allowed enough evidence for Christianity to spread very quickly.
Yes.
Not only in Israel, but also in Rome, also in, Southern Europe. So it's important to note that these disciples of Jesus were skeptic themselves. The most prominent of the skeptics in the disciples was Thomas.
Doubting Thomas.
Doubting Thomas, yes. And Thomas, when he was being skeptical of Jesus, it was during the resurrection. The disciples had told Thomas that Jesus had appeared to them and that he had risen from the dead. And he told them that he was not going to believe this until he thrust his fingers into his side and his hands. Jesus actually went up to him and he told Thomas, put your hands in my side. Feel the holes in my hands. And Thomas did, and he fell to the ground and declared, "My Lord and my God." All right, now, biblically, there were more skeptics than just Thomas. James, the brother of Jesus, and Jesus' other brothers. This could have been based on haughtiness or jealousy or pride or something like that. Who knows? But eventually they did come around, and James actually wrote James.
Right. But why did Jesus' brothers all have this conflict?
Well, if you're asking me, Kevin, there is an instance in the Bible where Jesus visits his hometown of Bethlehem, and he is not working miracles there because of their unbelief, and he tells them that.
Correct. What else, Noah?
Well, it is possible that his family members wanted the same type of evidence. They wanted to test God, per se, by having him perform miracles for them as some sort of circus act, and then they'll believe.
And what did Jesus do? The reason why he didn't perform those miracles in the town that he was raised and brought up in is because he was challenged by worldly people and not godly people. And so therefore it was unrighteous of him to be able to perform anything by God because they didn't have God's belief in the first place. It was only once that they accepted God and who he was that they were able to then accept that he was the Messiah.
That's right. Now, two of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, they were walking there pretty downtrodden after the death of Jesus, and Jesus comes up to them. He doesn't show himself to them necessarily. He's hidden from them. He hides his face from them. But eventually he reveals himself as Jesus, but not after having one amazing Bible study in which he shows them every place in the Old Testament where it speaks about Jesus being the Messiah. And that's one Bible study that would be pretty amazing to experience. So they were skeptics. They had thought, well, Jesus is gone. What do we do now? He must have not been the Messiah, along with many other of the disciples and followers of Jesus. They lost their faith in him. They were skeptical enough still to not be firm in their faith enough to believe that Jesus is the Messiah after his death.
But more importantly, the reason why they had that view and felt that way is because of all the leaders that they looked up to proclaimed it as such. And so therefore, they just adopted it as such when it was false, incorrect.
Right.
Because if those leaders would have said that he has risen, that he is the Messiah, how differently would things be?
Yes, and then, of course, Jesus presents them with more evidence for him being the Messiah, even more evidence after everything he already did. He presents them with more evidence, allowing them to be firm in their foundation of faith for Jesus Christ. So,
because he was the purified proof of their rebuking.
Yes, isn't it wonderful? Isn't it? It's just amazing how gentle Jesus was with the skeptics in the Bible. Now, some skeptics that Jesus was not so gentle with were the Pharisees. And the reason he wasn't so gentle with them wasn't because they were questioning Jesus necessarily. Most people were questioning Jesus. But it was because they were being religious hypocrites. And that was what Jesus was really honing in on. If you read the Gospels, Jesus really hones in on religious hypocrisy. So Jesus is often very gentle with skeptics in the Bible, but he's very harsh with religious hypocrisy. And that's one way that we should really, and that's one thing we should really keep in mind when we are being skeptical of certain things in the Bible. We should keep in mind that, if we are being religious hypocrites, if we are trying to avoid certain areas of the Bible because of what we're doing, because we're living in what the Bible is calling a sin, then that's different than being an authentic skeptic and being like, okay, well, where's the historical evidence for it? Where's the manuscript evidence? Where's the evidence that was shown in the mannerisms of the people in the Bible? That's different than being a religious hypocrite and saying, I think this is right. I feel like this is good. I really like this sin I'm committing according to the Bible. So I'm going to be a skeptic to the Bible and just write that off. That's much different. That's not healthy skepticism.
Well, yeah, but what that is partnering with or teaming up with the evil one.
Yeah, I had a feeling you were going there.
Yeah.
So, skepticism is in the Bible. And Jesus actually promotes skepticism. He tells us that in the case of false prophets, they may work miracles, but if they are contradicting God's word, God's law, then they're leading people astray. They're false prophets.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually condones a healthy amount of skepticism. He says, test every spirit.
Right. Because when it comes to laws, rules, and regulations versus God's commandments, everything else falls short other than the commandments. Laws are irrelevant because they're man-made. Rules and regulations are also man-made. But laws, the whole entire earth law, is by one entity.
That's right.
And there's no filtering it out for your convenience.
That's right. And these are also moral absolutes. They're cases where it's always right to follow this law. It's always wrong to disobey this law. So it goes much deeper than just, God declaring something because that's how he feels,
Mm-hmm.
On a certain day. He knows what's right for us. He knows what's wrong for us. It's good to keep that in mind. Now, so that covers biblical skepticism. There's a lot more we can go into, and I'm sure we will in further podcasts and videos. But let's move on to the scientific area of skepticism. Now, what I talked about in the last podcast, Open-Mindedness, was that quantum physics is changing a lot of how we see reality and what science knows to be true. I also talked about I briefly mentioned, that science is always in a place of skepticism, being that there could be certain results that are gotten from experiments, but then another experiment comes along with greater technology, more enhanced or evolved technology that then shows a different result with more accurate readings.
Right.
And this has happened in the past. So I'm going to highlight one very profound scientific experiment. And then I'll let you know how that's changed the scientific worldview, the modern scientific worldview.
Excellent.
So in the early 90s, a man named Vladimir Poponin conducted a series of experiments to investigate the relationship between human DNA and its interaction with the physical world. Now, the results of this experiment contradicted what was traditional science at that time. So what he did was he took a glass tube from which all the air was drawn out, and this created a vacuum in this glass tube. Although the air was drawn out, particles of light called photons remained inside the tube. So Poponin went on to measure the distribution of light in the tube. After measuring the distribution of the photon particles, it showed that the photon particles were distributed randomly. Next, human DNA was placed in the tube, and then when measuring the photon behavior, this time they found out that photons were aligned and positioned in some kind of order. The results showed that the photons aligned along the axis of the DNA, and this meaning they were somehow aware of it. In that vacuum, the space between the photons and the DNA, there was some sort of communication going on. When the DNA was removed from the tube, the photons did not go back to behaving randomly as initially observed. Even though the DNA was removed, the photons behaved as if the DNA were still there and maintaining the structure. So it seems like the DNA left an energetic imprint after it was removed from the tube. And these photons then behaved as if it was still there. So what this shows is there's some sort of energetic communication in a vacuum. It shows that there's a subtler energy field that's allowing communication between energy, photons, light particles, and whatever else is around it. And so this is a very profound conclusion. And what this changed was the whole basis for scientific materialism, where one thing can only affect another thing if there's some sort of material or some sort of energy between the two.
There has to be an element other than what's in the tube to be able to then have them communicate with each other, leaving no element of surprise.
Very insightful, Kevin. Now, this experiment's outcomes could explain many familiar phenomena. When you go into a room and you feel a bad energy, could explain the communication going on there. The intuition. We talked about this in the Destiny, Fate, and Heartbrain Intuition episode. Intuition is a very profound phenomena that goes on, and this could, point to that being correct. Not just, some sort of feeling or hunch that we get, but an actual real form of communication that's happening. Mm-hmm. And I believe it is. There's enough experimentation done now that I think that that's a solidified conclusion based on the evidence. So science is always changing. Science is ever changing based on more evidence, based on better technology to be able to find more evidence for certain worldviews.
Right.
And this experiment had some very profound implications. Now, this is not the only. This is one of many different experiments that have been done in recent times, the last 100 years, that really have shaken the foundation of what we thought was real.
Yeah. So when you put matter into other matter, that matter knows that other matter matters. Yeah. I know that was hard to be able to say.
No, I got it.
But the bottom line is that it needed no intelligence. It needed no coaching. It needed no guidance. It automatically knew that the other substance that was in the tube was corresponding, communicating with, or energy guiding that for which was in the tube, and that within itself was the resonance of the element that was in there, leaving no surprise.
Yes. Yeah, the energetic imprint. Now, we're going to wrap this podcast up. I want to leave you listeners with a conclusion to why we're talking about skepticism. Just if you haven't gotten it already, skepticism is healthy. Don't let anyone ever tell you that skepticism is unhealthy. What's unhealthy is a haughtiness that actually takes away from a healthy skepticism, takes away from what skepticism is meant to do, which is reveal the truth. Mm-hmm. And it causes you to have bias. So we don't want to be biased people. None of us want to be biased people. We may want to push a certain worldview more than others, but if we are healthy in our skepticism, mm-hmm. then if that worldview is true, we have no reason to fear other worldviews. We have only the opportunity to gain more understanding of what other people believe in contrary to that. And then the unhealthy skepticism, of course, is causing us to shy away from those experiences, causing us to get angry at those experiences. We talked about that in the last podcast, how every time that a belief is challenged, it's very easy for you to get into a fight or flight mode. Mm-hmm. And having a healthy level of skepticism means, okay, maybe I can take a step back, research this, and get back to you, instead of trying to come back with, everything you got in an angry fashion. That's not healthy. It's not right. It shouldn't be done. Instead, we can have dialogues that are respectful. We can have dialogues that help both parties learn and grow. And that's what this podcast is all about. That's why we're bringing you the Skepticism Podcast, because we want to assure you that if you are a skeptic out there, a little bit of self-analyzation is good. Make sure you're not being haughty. Make sure you're considering the evidence where it is and making solidified conclusions based on that evidence. Kevin, you got any last words for us?
So, in closing, just like we brought you the ancestral, biblical, and scientifically accurate insights and information, there is a 3-step process when being skeptical. You need to be able to review the information, research the accuracy of the information, to then make an intelligent, well-informed decision as far as what you're going to do with that information once it's discovered. Now, if you want to put in the 4th element, is then being able to let other people be aware, knowledgeable of it. So, in skepticism and being skeptical, positive brings results. Negative brings literal and physical and spiritual deceit upon your own soul, upon your own goals and dreams, and your relationships with and without people. But more importantly, it takes you away from God that can save you from all of it. So, the most positive thing you can do is be skeptical in a positive way, in a new way. And I hope that today we taught you on how to be skeptical in a positive way today, because your life matters. What you think, what you feel, what you believe matters. If this information resonates with you, if you found a connection with it, if you found value within it, please like it, share it, and subscribe to our podcasts. Above and beyond all of that is that if we weren't here from our ancestors getting us here, we would not have been able to be of value to you today. So we thank you for not only listening to the podcast, but valuing the information that we share in a new way. We look forward to being able to see you and to hear from you on our next podcast.
Hallelujah. We'll meet you there.
This has been another life-enhancing, authenticated podcast aired by the OIC and brought to you by the faithful OIC sponsors and contributors. Please tune in every week and subscribe to our podcast. And while you're there, explore our website with all the posts, videos, and podcasts that we have created with you in mind. While you're on the journey through our website, you will see our Patreon page where you can become a faithful contributor yourself with the freedom to be a part of our team today. Thank you.